9 Times Death Missed Lincoln, Episode 5, The Dream That Warned Him. He dreamed of his own funeral inside the White House. Days later, someone in the shadows came to make it real. Chapter 1: The House of Mourning. It was past midnight when Abraham Lincoln awoke, his breath shallow, his face slick with cold sweat. He sat upright in bed, heart racing, the image still clinging to his vision, sharp, vivid, too precise to be discarded as a common nightmare. In the darkness of the presidential bedroom, he stared at the ceiling. The candle had long burned out. The fire had dimmed to dull orange. Outside, the wind whispered against the windows in long, mournful tones. He swung his legs over the bed and stood. The room was silent, but the echo of the dream remained. He didn't light a lamp. He didn't need to. He knew the way. He walked slowly to his writing desk, opened the drawer, took out a sheet of thick paper and dipped a pen into ink. He began to write. Greater than, about 10 days ago, I had a strange dream, so strange that I have thought about it almost every night since. He paused, wrote again. Greater than, I seemed to be in the White House. There was a death-like stillness about me. The line scratched softly against the silence. Greater than, I heard subdued sobs, as if a number of people were weeping. I wandered from room to room. No living person was in sight. But the same mournful sounds continued. He stopped again. His hand trembled. He stared down at the inked page. He could still see it. The coffin, in the East Room, draped in black, surrounded by guards, faces pale, eyes full of grief. He walked closer in the dream. Asked who had died. A soldier responded. Greater than, the president. He was killed by an assassin. Lincoln had woken with a gasp, the words still ringing in his ears. He folded the paper, slid it back into the drawer. Did not sign it. Some truths were too heavy for signatures. That morning, he told Mary, over tea, quietly. She went pale. Greater than, don't speak of such things, she said, setting down her cup. Greater than, you know I dream, too, and I dream of blood. Lincoln gave a half smile. Greater than, perhaps dreams are how death sends letters it doesn't want delivered yet. But he was shaken. For days afterward, those around him noticed changes. He walked more slowly, ate less, spoke with a wariness that went beyond exhaustion. Even his jokes, always his shield, were quieter, sadder. He told his personal secretary, John Hay, greater than, this house feels too quiet, like it's holding its breath. The dream gnawed at him. At MetaFacts Legends, we recovered 3 separate diary entries by White House staff in March 1865, all referencing Lincoln's unease. One entry, written by a maid assigned to the second floor. Greater than, the president walks the halls alone at night. I see his shadow under the doors. Sometimes he stops, listens, as if waiting for someone to call his name. Another, from Thomas Pendle, doorkeeper to the White House. Greater than, he asked me once if the East Room had ever been used for a funeral before. I told him yes, for President Harrison. He said, I think it may again, then walked away. Dreams can be dismissed, but Lincoln's couldn't, because this one lingered, because this one felt like a message. On March 28, 1865, he shared the dream with his cabinet. Not all of it, just enough. They laughed nervously, brushed it off. War made men strange, but Stanton, the Secretary of War, said nothing. He simply stared. Later that night, he pulled Crook aside. Greater than, if the president dreams of death, double the guard. Crook obeyed, but quietly. No alarms, no public increase in security. Lincoln would not allow it. He had said many times, greater than, if they want me, they will get me. There is no hiding from a bullet. But he had not spoken of poison. He had not spoken of shadows. He had not spoken of dreams. The White House itself seemed to bend to the tension. The walls creaked more. The floors groaned. The air grew heavy. One night, Mary told her sister, greater than, I feel we're living inside a waiting room for something terrible. That same night, Lincoln refused dinner. He walked instead to the East Room. Empty, dark, He stood in the center, looked up at the high ceiling, then down at the space where the coffin had stood in his dream. Greater than, it's the stillness that frightens me, he whispered. Crook, who had followed him, said nothing, just waited. Eventually, Lincoln turned. Greater than, do you believe in omens? Crook hesitated. Greater than, I believe in men, sir, and I believe some dreams come from truth. Lincoln nodded. Greater than, so do I. Chapter 2. A door left open. The White House was never truly silent. Even in the small hours, when the diplomats had gone, and the chimneys exhaled their last breath of smoke, there was still the sounds. The creak of old wood, the click of settling pipes, the soft shuffle of guards walking their rounds. But on April 3rd, 1865, there was one sound that didn't belong. The soft, unmistakable groan of a door being opened from the inside. At 2:17 a.m., Private Joseph Langley was posted outside the East Corridor on the ground floor of the Executive Mansion. The air was cold, damp with spring, and Langley's coat was drawn tight against his chest. He had just passed the timepiece by the main stairs when he heard it. A door, gently, slowly, opening, not slammed, not forced, just opening. Langley stopped, listened. Nothing. He moved toward the hallway. It was dark, too dark. Usually, a single oil lamp burned there, out of habit, not necessity, but tonight, it was out. Langley drew his revolver, not from fear, from training. He stepped forward. Greater than, who's there? He called, voice low but firm. Silence. He walked the corridor, checked the parlors, all empty. Then he reached the southeast service door, the one that led to the garden path, usually used by staff during daylight. It was ajar, open by 2 inches. Langley pushed it gently. The hinges gave a quiet cry. He looked outside. Nothing. No movement. No footsteps in the gravel. No torchlight. Just night. Deep, empty, watching. He closed the door, secured it, and then he saw it. Something small, folded, lying just inside the threshold on the stone floor. A piece of paper. He bent down, picked it up, unfolded. There were only 6 words, written in black ink. Greater than, I saw him laid in state. Langley froze. He knew those words. Everyone inside the White House knew them now. Lincoln's dream, his funeral. Inside the East Room, he had shared it more than once. Quietly, unnerved, but not publicly, and no one outside the mansion staff should have known. Langley handed the paper to his superior. The note reached Ward Hill Lamont by morning. By midday, it reached Lincoln. He said nothing, just held the paper between his fingers, stared at it for a long moment, then set it down. Greater than, doors swing, notes drift. He said, perhaps a gust, perhaps nothing. Lamont didn't believe that, nor did John Nicolay, nor did Mary. She turned pale when she read it. Greater than, that's the same line. She whispered. Greater than, exactly the same. MetaFacts Legends found the original incident logged in the daily White House security summary, redacted and stored in the National Archives under a file labeled Anomalous Entry. April 3rd, the door had not been forced. No locks broken, no windows shattered, and yet someone had entered and left behind only a sentence that came from inside the president's own mind. Also, he thought, the guards were doubled that night. Lincoln did not leave his study. He ate dinner in silence, refused visitors. He stood once at the window, looked into the garden, and said to Crook, greater than, do you suppose the dead can return early if their place is already set? Crook didn't answer. Lincoln did not sleep. Not truly. He closed his eyes. But the dream returned. The same hallway, the same sobs, the same draped coffin. Only this time, he looked closer. The man standing beside the body. He wasn't a soldier, wasn't Stanton, wasn't anyone he knew. The man was young, wore no uniform, had a scar across his cheek. And as Lincoln approached, the man turned, looked at him, smiled. Greater than, you were right. The man said, greater than, it ends soon. Lincoln woke gasping. Drenched in sweat, he rang for Crook. Crook arrived in seconds. Greater than, sir. Greater than, there's a man. In the east room. In the dream. He spoke this time. Crook blinked. Greater than, what did he say? Lincoln looked at him, eyes haunted. Greater than, he said it ends soon. The door had been opened. The dream had changed. The watcher was no longer silent. And still, no one knew who had entered the White House. No guards were missing. No keys unaccounted for. No alarms triggered. At MetaFacts Legends, we tracked security rotations for that night. There was a 15-minute gap in the south hallway. A porter, name redacted, had stepped away early. Felt sudden illness. Vomited. Claimed it was something he ate. He was replaced temporarily by a stand-in from the kitchen staff. Untrained, unarmed, unaware, the replacement claimed he saw nothing. But another witness, a scullery maid, later told her daughter, greater than, that night, I saw a man step out from the wall. I thought he was a guard, but he wasn't. He smiled at me, didn't say a word, and walked into the dark. Her daughter recorded this memory in a diary in 1917. We found it, dusty and unpublished, in a family archive in Virginia. It matches the timeline, matches the face from Lincoln's dream, matches the scar. But who was he? Not Booth. Not yet. Someone else. Someone already inside. Not just the house. Inside the moment. Inside the dream. Inside the death Lincoln had already seen. After the note, the security report stopped mentioning open doors. But guards began carrying extra pistols. Lamont started sleeping in a chair near Lincoln's office. Crook walked the hallways twice per hour. And Lincoln, he said nothing more, just waited, listened, watched the door, because he knew the door hadn't just been left open. It had been opened for someone. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. The Man in the Garden. He was first seen at a distance, twice in the same week, always just beyond the fence, always after dark, not close enough to touch, not far enough to ignore. The White House had gardens then, less manicured than today, more wild around the edges. There were hedges that grew long, overgrown vines along the south wall, and winding gravel paths that disappeared behind carriage houses and gateposts. It was on one of these paths, near the trellis by the tool shed, that Lincoln's head gardener, William Bell, spotted him. Bell was an older man, with knees that ached and a voice like gravel soaked in bourbon. He worked quietly, rarely spoke unless spoken to, and knew every inch of the grounds better than anyone but the squirrels. That evening, he was tending to late-blooming ivy near the southeast fence when he caught a flash of movement. A man, not in uniform, standing just beyond the iron bars. Watching. Bell squinted. Greater than, evening, he called out, cautious but firm. The man didn't reply. He stood still, too still. Then, without a word, he turned and vanished into the darkness. Bell said nothing that night, but he remembered, and when he saw the same figure again 3 nights later, same place, same time, he went toward Hill Lamont. Lamont took it seriously. He always did. After the note, after the dream, after the door, everything was a threat now. He asked Bell to describe the man. Greater than, tall, Bell said. Greater than, lean, wore a brown coat, wide hat, could have been 30, maybe 40, walked like a soldier. Lamont frowned. Greater than, why do you say that? Bell tapped his temple. Greater than, it's in the posture. Weight on the balls of his feet. Head up, like he's used to looking for targets. Lamont nodded. Greater than, did he carry anything? Greater than, not that I could see. But Bell had seen more than most. The president wasn't told. Not immediately. Not because they wanted to keep him in the dark, but because he already had enough darkness. Lincoln was exhausted, haunted, still thinking of the dream, still staring out windows longer than necessary, still asking Crook to walk the corridors with him in silence. When he was finally told, he listened carefully, then asked a single question. Greater than, did the man smile? Bell paused. Greater than, no, sir, just watched. Lincoln nodded. Greater than, that's worse. At MetaFacts Legends, we cross-referenced reports of suspicious figures near the executive mansion from March to April 1865. There were 4, 3 were vagrants, drunk, harmless, arrested, released. But the 4th, no arrest, no name, no incident filed, just a note, seen loitering near South Fence, 11:35 p.m. Described as unidentifiable, the handwriting matched that of Langley, the same guard who found the open door. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone was circling, measuring, waiting. A week later, a groundskeeper found something wedged between the bars of the fence near where the man had stood. A bullet casing, .44 caliber, fresh, clean, no rust, no sign of weathering. It hadn't been fired, but it had been placed. Deliberately, Lincoln was shown the casing. He turned it over in his fingers. Greater than, they always leave tokens now, he murmured. Croc stood beside him. Greater than, sir, if he let us call in more. Greater than, no, Lincoln said. Greater than, if they want to reach me, they'll find a way. All we can do is delay them long enough to finish what needs finishing. Mary overheard him that night. She wept, because she believed him, because she, too, had seen something that week. While walking with her maid on the north lawn, she glanced toward the garden wall and froze. A man, watching, then gone. She didn't say anything until days later. Didn't want to add to the fear. But the fear didn't need help. It grew on its own. Lincoln began asking unusual questions. To Lamont, greater than, if I died suddenly, would they mourn more for the man or the myth? To Hay, greater than, do you think the people believe in Providence? Or in the president? To Crook, greater than, would a second shot be quieter than the first? He never said why, but they knew. The man was still out there. And then, something new. One night, Bell again saw the figure near the fence. But this time, he wasn't alone. He had a satchel, large, canvas, military. He set it down near the hedge, looked up at the White House windows, waited. Then, calmly, he picked up the bag and walked away. Bell rushed to the spot. Nothing. No footprints. No signs. But the presence remained. Bell swore he'd never seen eyes like that. Greater than, it wasn't hate. He told Lamont. Greater than, it was certainty. Like he already knew how it ended. Lamont ordered 4 patrols, expanded the perimeter, even considered moving Lincoln out of the White House for a few days. But Lincoln refused. Greater than, if I run now, I'll spend the rest of my life running. MetaFacts Legends later uncovered a letter, unsigned, unmailed, found in the attic of a house in Baltimore. It read, greater than, the garden is open. The time is right, he walks alone too often. It was dated April 5th, 6 days before the final attempt. But not by Booth, by someone else, someone forgotten by history, because the attempt failed, because no shot was fired, because the man in the garden vanished before his name could be remembered. But the fear didn't vanish. The weight didn't lift. The president, in those final days, carried more than a country. He carried the knowledge that death had tried once again to touch his shoulder. And missed, barely, because someone saw a shadow, because someone doubled the guard, because someone kept walking the fence line, and because Lincoln, somehow, kept walking forward, even through the garden, even with a dream in his head, and someone real watching from the trees. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. A message in the firelight. The night the lights went out in the White House, Abraham Lincoln didn't reach for a lamp. He reached for the candle. Electricity had not yet touched the executive mansion. Gaslight had been installed in parts of the building, but the system was unreliable, often flickering out without warning. On April 8, 1865, just past 11 p.m., the flame on Lincoln's desk sputtered once, then vanished. Crook, seated outside the president's study, heard the soft metallic clink of the snuffer fall. Then, silence. Then, the familiar scrape of a match. Crook stood, knocked gently. Lincoln's voice came from within, calm, quiet. Leave it be, Mr. Crook. I don't need the gas. Just the candle tonight. Crook hesitated. The house was too quiet lately. But he stepped back, sat down, waited. Inside, Lincoln leaned into the low light, the candle casting long shadows across the carved edges of the bookshelves. He was reading, though not a report, not a letter, a worn volume of Shakespeare's Macbeth *, open to Act 2. Scene 1. Greater than, is this a dagger which I see before me? He read aloud in a whisper. His eyes lingered on the page. Greater than, come, let me clutch thee. He closed the book. The room seemed colder than usual. He pulled his shawl tighter, let his eyes wander to the fireplace, now dim with embers. That's when he saw it. In the ashes, something dark, not quite burnt, not part of the wood. He leaned forward, used the fireplace poker to drag it into the open flame. It was a folded sheet of paper, scorched at the edges, still intact in the center. He retrieved it carefully, unfolded it, and read the message, written in black, smeared with soot. Greater than, you were right. It ends soon. He froze. The exact words the man in his dream had spoken. Not similar, exact. He stood, turned, walked to the door, opened it. Crook stood up immediately. The look on Lincoln's face stopped him. Greater than, get Mr. Lamont, and has someone checked the fireplaces in every room? Everyone. Crook obeyed. By morning, 3 other fireplaces were searched. 2 clean. 1, Mary's sitting room, contained a half-burned matchbook. No paper, no message, but it proved something had been placed. Intentionally, the White House had been breached again. No guards had reported movement. No doors had been forced. No windows left open. At MetaFacts Legends, we recovered the original firewatch logs from the White House steward's office. On the night of April 8th, a junior staff member recorded, greater than, smelled smoke in West Hallway around 11. Unusual for that hour, no sign of source. A footnote was added 2 days later. Greater than, President reported finding foreign object in embers. No further inquiry, because the next morning, news from the South arrived. Lee had surrendered. Appomattox. The war, at least on paper, was ending. Washington erupted in celebration. Bells rang. Cannons fired in salute. The streets swelled with cheers. But Lincoln, he stayed inside. He stood by the fireplace and reread the message. Again and again. Crook later recalled. Greater than, he held it like scripture. He never looked away. That afternoon, he called for his valet and said, greater than, lay out my best black coat. Not the one for meetings. The one for mourning. The valet hesitated. Greater than, sir. Lincoln didn't explain. He simply said, greater than, I may need it. Mary was the first to ask what was wrong. He answered without looking at her. Greater than, they've written it now. The end. And signed it with fire. That night, as the city drank and sang and raised toasts to victory, Lincoln sat in his study alone. He wrote a letter, not to a general, not to Congress, to his son. Greater than, Tad, the world has many victories. None of them last, but you, my son, you last. I hope you live long enough to forget what I had to carry. He folded the letter, sealed it, left it on the edge of the mantel. At MetaFacts Legends, we obtained a copy of this letter, retrieved decades later from the Lincoln family archives. It is dated April 8th. It does not mention the message, but the handwriting is shaky. Unlike Lincoln's usual firm, precise hand, he was scared, and rightly so, because that night, the man returned at 3:12 a.m. A servant named Jacob Field saw him. Tall, brown coat, same scar, standing in the center of the North Garden, facing the White House, unmoving. Fields called out. The man didn't move. Fields ran inside. By the time guards reached the lawn, he was gone. Again, vanished into the fog. Again. That morning, another message was found. This time, left on the edge of the garden bench, written in charcoal on linen. Greater than, the house is almost ready. Lincoln never saw that note. It was intercepted, but it didn't matter. He already knew. He told Nicolay that day. Greater than, the house has mourned before. It may mourn again. Nicolay tried to reassure him. Greater than, you survived too much to fall now. Lincoln smiled. Greater than, no man survives forever. But he might delay the inevitable by paying attention. The message in the firelight wasn't a threat. It was a promise that someone out there knew the dream, knew the words, knew the end. It was personal now. The war was over, but the war inside the house had just begun. A silent war of shadows, of dreams, of letters that didn't burn completely, and a president who had already walked through the funeral he feared would come. Crook later wrote, greater than, he looked at everyone differently after that, like he was trying to memorize us before he was gone. On April 9th, Lincoln finally stepped outside. He walked the garden path. Alone, no hat, no coat. He paused at the bench, looked down, and said to himself, greater than, I wonder if I'm early or already late. That night, he told Mary, greater than, I dreamed again. But this time, the coffin was closed. She wept, asked him not to go to the theater that week. He said, greater than, if I stop living, I'm already dead. And in the shadows of the firelight, a message still waited, a truth still burned, and someone was still out there. Not Booth, not yet, but someone who had written the ending before the curtain had even risen. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. The Visitor Without a Name. There was a man in Washington who never signed the hotel ledger. He checked in late, under clouded skies and silence. No bags, no coat, only a worn traveler's cloak, and a single item in his pocket, a folded sheet of paper with one line written in fading ink. Greater than, he sleeps beneath the stars, but the curtain falls soon. No one asked him questions, not because he seemed dangerous, because he seemed ordinary, too ordinary. That was the brilliance of it. Booth was a showman, loud, known, a man who wanted to be remembered. But this man, moved like someone who had no name worth knowing. At MetaFacts Legends, we uncovered a string of unverified sightings in the week before April 14th. 1865, not of Booth, not of the conspirators, of another man, one who shadowed their paths, but never joined them. He was seen near Ford's Theater, seen walking near the War Department, seen, briefly, leaning against the south fence of the executive mansion at dusk. No one ever spoke to him, except once, April 10th, just past midnight, a stable hand named Elijah Burns was smoking behind the Willard Hotel when the man approached him. He said, greater than, do they cheer louder for peace or survival? Burns was confused. Greater than, sorry, sir. The man pointed toward the crowd in Lafayette Square, where fireworks were bursting overhead. Greater than, for the war's end, or the man who kept it stitched together. Burns shrugged. Greater than, both, I reckon. The man nodded. Greater than, then only one must go. He turned, walked into the dark. 4 days later, Lincoln was shot, but not by that man. At least, not directly, because on the night of April 12th, Ward Hill Lamont received a message delivered by an anonymous hand, left on his desk in the dead of night. It read, greater than, you look in the wrong direction. Booth is loud, but silence is fatal. Lamont ignored it. At the time, it sounded like nonsense. Only later did he remember the handwriting. Because 2 days before, a stranger had attempted to deliver a letter to Lincoln directly. He arrived at the White House gates at 7:45 p.m. Claimed he had correspondence from Richmond. Would not give a name. Would not explain. He was turned away. But as he walked off, he said to the guard, greater than, if the dream is true, then this is the final chapter. That phrase, the dream, it hadn't been public knowledge yet. Only Lincoln's inner circle knew. Crook was notified, but by the time anyone looked, the man was gone. No description recorded, no pursuit ordered, just a line in a forgotten notebook. Greater than, April 12th. Strange man, referred to President's dream, refused name. We found the notebook in a private collection in upstate New York, donated by the family of a former White House aide. who had served under Lincoln only briefly. The handwriting matched other known logs. But who was the man? And how did he know? That same night, across town, Booth met with his co-conspirators, discussed routes, timing, escape. The city buzzed with rumors. Peace was here, celebration filled the air, but Lincoln was subdued. At dinner, Mary asked why he was quiet. He answered, "Greater than, I feel as though I'm waiting for someone to arrive. And I'm not sure if they come as friend or executioner." She said, "Greater than, then don't go to the theater Friday." He smiled, "Greater than, if I cancel every night the shadows lengthen. I'll never leave this house again." He left the table early, returned to his study, sat by the firelight, reread the message that had emerged from the ashes days before. "Greater than, you were right. It ends soon." That same night, a clerk at the War Department claimed a man attempted to enter using a forged identification pass. It was caught. The man fled. No name given. No report filed. The official reason: disruption avoided. MetaFacts Legends obtained a scan of that forged ID, recovered from the trash heap behind the building the next morning. The name: Franklin Still. Not an employee, not a soldier, but the signature. It was eerily close to Lincoln's own. Deliberately forged, as if someone was trying to become him or gain access in his name. And then vanish. Franklin Still, a name that exists nowhere else. No census, no military record, no property, only on that one torn paper, only in that one moment. A visitor without a name, using a name that wasn't his. To go where? To do what? Lincoln would never find out. Because by the morning of April 14th, the man was gone. No hotel record, no sightings, no notes, just absence, just the breath before the curtain fell. But we believe he wasn't a hallucination. We believe he was real. Because 2 years later, in a letter from a former Union Telegraph officer named Martin Kane, a strange paragraph appears. Kane had been stationed at the War Department during the week of Lincoln's death. He wrote, "Greater than, there was another man. Not Booth, not Herald. A third, moved quietly, knew too much. I saw him once, in the hall near Stanton's office. He looked at me like he'd read my thoughts before I had them. Then he left. No one else saw him. But I swear, he was the one." The letter was never mailed. Filed with Kane's will. We found it in a probate archive, unopened for over a century. Whoever the visitor was, he was close enough to know the dream, close enough to walk the grounds, close enough to get past the first layer of protection, and perhaps close enough to inspire Booth. Because after April 10th, Booth's behavior changed. He became more urgent, more obsessive, as if someone had told him the clock had already started, as if someone had whispered, "If you don't act now, someone else will." Was it the man with no name? Did he light the fire Booth carried to Ford's Theater? Or was he simply there to witness it, to ensure it happened, to make sure the prophecy was fulfilled? No one can say, because when the shot rang out, and Lincoln slumped forward, and the curtain fell, he was never seen again. The visitor without a name. No grave, no record, no trace, only a shadow that moved just ahead of the blade, a figure behind the curtain, a whisper before the fire, and a silence that Lincoln heard long before the world knew what it meant. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6: The Dream That Waited. April 14th, 1865. Morning. Lincoln rose early. The sky was pale blue, soft with spring. The sounds of the city waking echoed through the open windows, horses on cobblestones. A boy selling papers, church bells far in the distance. He stood by the mirror and adjusted his collar slowly. Hands steady, eyes tired. In the mirror, he saw himself in black. Not the usual coat, not the theater suit. This one was for funerals. The one he asked his valet to press a week earlier. The one he'd said, quietly, without explanation, "I may need it." But this morning, he chose another, lighter fabric, a simpler cut. He told his valet, "Greater than, it's too fine a day to wear grief." The valet didn't argue. Lincoln turned to the window. Greater than, they say peace has come. But peace doesn't sing to me yet. At breakfast, Mary noticed his silence. Again, greater than, the dream again? She asked. He nodded. Greater than, yes, but different. Greater than, different how? Greater than, the coffin was gone, but the sobbing remained. She reached across the table. Greater than, don't go to the theater tonight. He looked at her, gently. Greater than, if I stop living, I let the dream win. MetaFacts Legends recovered multiple staff testimonies from April 14th, preserved in post-war interviews and diaries. Several recorded Lincoln being unusually affectionate, shaking hands longer, asking about families, pausing, as though seeing people for the last time. One aide remembered, greater than, he told me, I think I shall see you again. But if I do not, be well, he said it like a man going to sleep. That day, he met with General Grant, discussed post-war reconstruction. The country needed mending, but he spoke less about the Union and more about forgiveness. Greater than, we must bind wounds, not reopen them, he said. Greater than, no revenge, no blood. The day moved gently, uneventful, but in the quiet corners, the dream waited. He walked the gardens once, alone, the same path he had taken the week before. Past the bench, past the fence where the man had stood. He paused, no one there, no shadow, but still, he spoke aloud. Greater than, you've come so far. You might as well stay for the ending. Crook walked behind him. He hesitated. Greater than, sir. Lincoln turned, smiled faintly. Greater than, nothing. Just finishing a conversation. At MetaFacts Legends, we reviewed the official log from the executive mansion for that day. Nothing irregular, no alarms, no missing guards, only a brief notation under evening orders. Greater than, escort President and Mrs. Lincoln to Ford's Theater. Leave by carriage at 8 p.m. sharp. No hesitation, no delay, as if nothing were waiting, as if history hadn't already rehearsed the scene. As if the dream had not already begun to breathe. 7:22 p.m. Lincoln sat in his study, alone. The fire was lit, the candle flickered. He took out a sheet of paper, began to write. It wasn't policy, not a speech, a letter, to no one in particular. Greater than, I have walked a long road under heavy clouds. I have heard the music of war and the silence of graves. And still, I walk, because I must, not for legacy, not for power, but for peace. He paused, then added, greater than, if this is the last word I leave, let it be this. May the nation I carried never again carry such sorrow. He folded the page, placed it in his coat pocket. At 8:10 p.m., the carriage arrived. He stepped inside, waved to the small group outside, smiled. Crook wasn't with him. He'd been told to stay behind, a decision he'd regret for the rest of his life. Mary sat beside Lincoln. Greater than, you look content. He nodded. Greater than, I seen the end. I'm not afraid of it. They rode in silence. At Ford's Theater, the crowd cheered. The orchestra played. They entered, took their seats. The play began. And somewhere, the dream waited, not in the script, not in the actors' voices, but in the shadows above the stage. It had waited long enough. At 10:13 p.m., a gun was fired, a single shot, a scream, a silence, and in that moment, brief, eternal, reality folded into memory. The dream stood beside the truth and watched. Booth fled. The crowd panicked. Doctors rushed, but history didn't stop, because the moment had already been rehearsed, already lived, already seen. MetaFacts Legends traced every whisper from the days before the shot. From the man with no destination, the note in the fireplace, the scarred face at the garden gate, the visitor without a name. The bullet was real, but the warning had come before. And Lincoln, he had heard it, felt it, lived it, survived it again and again until he didn't. His heart still beat that night, but his soul had already walked ahead. The coffin was waiting, not in a dream, in the East Room, just as he'd seen it, just as he'd said. And now, more than a century later, we remember Not just the shot, but the silence before it. The warning in the night. The fire that wouldn't go out. Because some dreams are not illusions. They are maps, and Lincoln followed his until the last page turned. End of chapter 6. But the story doesn't begin at Ford's Theater. It begins years earlier, with a train ride to Washington and 12 nights waiting in Baltimore. Episode 6, The Baltimore Conspiracy, coming next on MetaFacts Legends. Find the full story in our series playlist, linked in the description.